Straight ahead on Law and Crime Daily. Musician Marilyn Manson accused of sexually assaulting Evan Rachel Wood. Why the actor turned activist says she's coming forward now.
I was deeply terrified, and that fear lives with me to this day.
Singer Mariah Carey is being sued by her own sister. And a suspect in an infamous hijacking case dies. Experts say the true identity behind the D.B. Cooper case may never be known.
If they had had substantive information, I think they would have slapped the cuffs on him.
Plus, a New Hampshire man charged with killing a minister points the finger at another suspect. We break down the defense's legal arguments.
I do think there's potentially exculpatory evidence in there.
Law and Crime Daily, covering court cases.
Stuck in once again, but I know he'll be back in the studio soon. In the meantime, let's get started. Actor and activist Evan Rachel Wood is now publicly accusing musician Marilyn Manson of sexual abuse.
Wood took to Instagram, writing, "The name of my abuser is Brian Warner, also known to the world as Marilyn Manson. He started grooming me when I was a teenager and horrifically abused me for years." Wood's relationship with Manson became public in 2007, when she was 19 and he was 38. They were briefly engaged. Manson responded on Instagram, saying these claims about him are horrible distortions of reality. My intimate relationships have always been entirely consensual with like-minded partners. His record label has since dropped him. Wood testified in front of Congress in 2018 to advocate for the Survivor Bill of Rights Act. While she didn't name her accuser then, she described a harrowing tale of assault.
Toxic mental, physical, and sexual abuse, which started slow but escalated over time, including threats against my life, severe gaslighting and brainwashing, waking up to the man that claimed to love me, raping what he believed to be my unconscious body. And the worst part, sick rituals of binding me up by my hands and feet to be mentally and physically tortured until my abuser felt I had proven my love for them.
All right, let's get into it. Brian, California State Senator Susan Rubio has asked the DOJ to launch a probe, wrote a letter to the AG and the head of the FBI. How could that play out?
Yeah, Jesse, the name of the game is investigation. They're going to look deep into Marilyn Manson's past and talk to Miss Wood, as well as the other women who came out on social media saying that the allegations against Marilyn Manson, that Wood put out there, seems very similar to what happened to them. The next thing you're going to find out is whether or not these allegations fit within the statute of limitations, and if they do, they're going to go forward with charges.
You know, Terry, he's currently not charged, but when you look at this case, and you look at cases like the Harvey Weinstein case or the Bill Cosby cases, how are those cases going to affect a potential prosecution of Marilyn Manson?
I think they will have a big effect. Those were the first sexual assault cases of really public figures, and they were widely publicized. I think the issue here is because of that publicity, jurors or prospective jurors, they are going to know that it is okay. They might feel comfortable going ahead and convicting someone who has had this type of history because it's been done before. The other issue is if there are other women, and we see now that these other women are claiming that they too were assaulted, they might actually have to consider the prior bad acts under 404 and whether or not they can get these other women to testify in this case, if in fact there are charges brought.
Yeah, and it'll be interesting to see if anybody else comes forward, what evidence there might be. This could just be the beginning of something very large to come, like we saw when the New York Times broke that story on Harvey Weinstein. So it's a very interesting story. But in other celebrity legal news, and there's a bunch, singer Mariah Carey is being sued by her estranged sister for more than $1 million. The pop star's sister is claiming that she was publicly humiliated in the sister's new book entitled The Meaning of Mariah Carey. Carey claimed her older sister, Allison Carey, drugged her with Valium when she was 12 years old and let her go for a ride with the older sister's boyfriend who was carrying a gun. The singer also claims that Allison burned her with boiling tea. Now, according to court documents, Allison Carey says she was never given a chance to respond and that the singer has presented no evidence to substantiate the allegations. Now, Terry, here's what's interesting about this, because Allison Carey is suing her sister under a theory called intentional infliction of emotional distress. How do you prove that?
You know, intentional infliction of emotional distress is a plaintiff's dream cause of action, especially when all else fails, because the elements are relatively easy to demonstrate. First of all they have to show is that it was intentional, that the conduct was extreme, and that conduct caused severe emotional distress. So if Allison can show that Mariah intentionally tried to hurt her and that these words did in fact cause her emotional distress, she will have a viable claim. I'm not saying she's going to win, but she will survive a motion to dismiss based on a failure to state a cause of action.
Well, Brian, I turn it to you. She's demanding $1.25 million. Do you think that she has a successful claim here and enough to get that much?
I don't think that's going to be a successful claim. As Terri already laid out, those are the elements. But when we talk about Mariah Carey's intent in writing this book, what is it about? It's about her getting some of her trials and tribulations off her chest, not to directly harm her sister. And I think what's going to happen to the sister, she's going to find out, in order to have this claim to show that there's intentional emotional distress, she may have to come forward and say, were these allegations true? Did this actually happen? And that might poke a hornet's nest that she might not be willing to actually play around with.
Wow. Well, we have some more news out of Hollywood, and this one actually involves the Hollywood sign, believe it or not, because 6 people have been arrested after scaling the iconic landmark in an apparent attempt to change the letters to read Holly Boob. The Los Angeles Police Department says that it was a stunt done to try to raise breast cancer awareness. 5 men and 1 woman were seen trekking through the steep terrain. A police helicopter quickly launched to see the changing letters, and the 6 people are now facing charges of trespassing. What a story. A former NFL player has pleaded not guilty to felony domestic assault charges for allegedly attacking his girlfriend. Chad Wheeler was released from his position as offensive lineman for the Seattle Seahawks following his arrest. King County prosecutors say Wheeler viciously attacked the victim, choking her until she lost consciousness. The victim reportedly told authorities that when she awoke, Wheeler said, quote, "Wow, you're alive?" The altercation allegedly began after the victim refused to bow to Wheeler. The trial is scheduled to begin on April 6th. Still ahead on Law and Crime Daily, police in California from patrol duties. The officers were responding to a call of family trouble on Friday. Police body cam video shows officers trying to get the girl into a patrol car, but she repeatedly kicked and pulled at them. That's when an officer is heard saying, "Just spray her at this point." An internal investigation is now ongoing into the incident, and we're going to show you the video right now, but we warn you, it is disturbing.
Wait, can I just please get the snow off of me?
I'll get the snow off of you.
It's cold.
Get in the car. You've had your chance.
Get in the car now.
Okay?
Okay?
You've had your chances.
What are you doing? What are you doing? Because you're going to go to jail now, too.
Stop!
Sit up.
No!
You're acting like a child. Stop.
I am a child.
Just spray her.
I do not. No, I have
Just spray her at this point.
Stop!
Dear.
Stop!
I got her. I got her.
Please wipe my eye! Wipe my eye, please!
Unbelievable.
That's tough to watch. Switching gears, a years-long investigation leads to the arrest of a man suspected of raping several young girls in California. Law and Crime's Angenette Levy tells us why the case isn't closed.
Sheriff's deputies in San Mateo County, just outside of San Francisco, have been investigating the sexual assault of multiple young girls since 2012. Now a witness has come forward and identified the rapist.
The suspect has been identified as 30-year-old Kaylin Freeman, who lives on the coast in San Mateo County.
Detectives believe there are more victims that have yet to come forward. Freeman is accused of using social media apps to find his victims and luring them with drugs.
Sheriff's Office detectives are looking for any information regarding Kaylin Freeman and any information from anyone who's been victimized by Kaylin Freeman.
Right now, Kaylin Freeman faces a laundry list of charges, including rape and stalking, and more charges could be coming. For Law and Crime Daily, I'm Angenette Levy.
Okay, now, Brian, this case, pretty remarkable because it almost went cold, right? What are your thoughts on this?
Yeah, it's really interesting because at one point, this case, they had no leads. They had suspects, they had victims, they believed they had ties to who this person would be, but it almost went cold. That wasn't until a witness came forward and identified him, and now I think as we're hearing, there's going to be more and more victims that step forward as they're able to connect the dots as to who that perpetrator is that harmed them.
But Terry, in this kind of case, what would Freeman's best defense be? Because as of right now, where it's not looking too good for him.
You know, actually, Jesse, he has several defenses, I think. First of all, there's only been one victim who's come forward so far, and she's identified him, but what the defense could say is that it was a mistaken identity. This was too long ago. You don't remember exactly what it looked like. The other thing is that one thing I'm sure they're going to claim is this was over a social media app. He met her and others through these apps, and he may very well try to say that it was all consensual. My only hope is that if, in fact, he is the one, that they do get enough corroborating evidence to actually proceed and convict him if he's actually the one who did these rapes.
Well, Terry, you're a great lawyer, and those are great arguments. I don't know for him. If more people start coming forward and you have social media evidence, that's documentary evidence, I don't know. But you make some interesting arguments, and we'll ultimately see where this case goes, because I know a lot of people are watching that one. All right, coming up on Law and Crime Daily, a suspect in a decades-old skyjacking case passes away, but the mystery remains unsolved. Plus, how police say a man got away with squat. Welcome back, everybody. One of the suspects in the infamous D.B. Cooper hijacking has died at the age of 94. According to the FBI, a nondescript man calling himself Dan Cooper boarded a flight in Portland, Oregon, and made the plane take off again with just the crew on board. Cooper ordered course for Mexico City, but somewhere in between Seattle and Reno, he jumped out of the back of the plane using a parachute. The FBI says among the list of suspects was Sheridan Peterson, who once admitted that the FBI had good reason to suspect him. Forensic death investigator Joseph Scott Morgan says Cooper disappeared and his true identity remains unknown.
It's fantastical almost that someone could have survived a jump like that. You know, when you trace it back, you see what kind of elements had to be in place. Remember, they stopped this plane. He had them land this plane, the infamous D.B. Cooper. We don't know who D.B. Cooper actually is, and you know, had parachutes brought aboard, had the passengers disembark from the plane, and then you're going to do a jump, a kind of a low altitude jump into this heavily forested area. It's always been a wonder that anyone could survive. Remember, they did find particulate pieces of these monies that were given to him as a demand, and they've been found over the years in various creek beds and that sort of thing. So, look, D.B. Cooper's never going to go away, never ever.
And the mystery continues. Newly released surveillance footage shows the arrest of a man accused of squatting at Chicago O'Hare's airport for 3 months. Prosecutors say 2 United Airlines employees spotted Aditya Singh wearing an airport badge, and when they reportedly asked him for identification, they realized that the badge belonged to an employee who reported it missing last October. Police say Singh told them that he was scared to go home to Los Angeles due to COVID. He said he survived by asking passengers for food. Criminal defense attorney Gigi Gonzalez says that Singh faces up to 5 years in prison.
And the judge found it was really concerning, and she made a fabulous point where these airports are supposed to be so secure, especially post 9/11. We have all sorts of regulations and restrictions in the airports. So it's really surprising to learn that somebody can just squat in an airport for 3 months. And we're lucky this person was just scared of COVID, which is its own interesting issue. But what if this person had nefarious intentions, or, you know, had some sort of, malicious intent here? That could have been very, very dangerous. This was a risk to the community that someone was able to impersonate airport personnel for so long. I don't think that the state is going to be inclined to dismiss this case, only because they're going to want to send a message to the community that you can't just squat in an airport for 3 months and nothing happened to you. But here we have a nonviolent offender with no criminal history. I think he's got a good shot of getting some leniency if he decides to plead guilty and accept responsibility in this case.
All right, scary stuff. When we come back, a defendant accused of shooting a minister, then praying over his body. What supposedly led to this assault, and could there be an alternative suspect? Our legal analysts just ahead. A New Hampshire man has pleaded not guilty to fatally shooting a church minister in 2019. A grand jury indicted Brandon Castiglione for second-degree murder of Luis Garcia. Pelham police say that Garcia was working to paint the home of the defendant's father when he was shot in the back of the head. The defendant's family reported Castiglione praying and crying over the victim's body. Less than 2 weeks later, police say the victim's stepson, Dale Holloway, went to the church during a wedding and shot a woman marrying the defendant's father and a minister. Both survived their injuries, but now Castiglione's defense attorneys are requesting access to Holloway's discovery.
State has sort of taken this view that Mr. Holloway was there in the church as a cause and effect of this case, but we do not have to accept that. And certainly, again, as I mentioned, the fact that someone 12 days later went to shoot at the church, to shoot at Bishop Stroh, to shoot at other members of the church with Mr. Holloway's sort of background, I do think there's potentially exculpatory evidence in there to provide a motive or opportunity for someone else to have caused the death of Mr. Garcia, which is, of course, what we plan on arguing. Mr. Castiglione had provided some guns to Mr. Garcia, that Mr. Garcia was in possession of some of his guns. There's potentially some information about that. Just because Mr. Castiglione's name does not appear does not mean that there is not exculpatory information contained.
The defense maintains that their client is innocent and says that there could be information that points to Holloway as the possible shooter in both incidents.
But certainly there could be evidence about any animosity that Mr. Holloway may have had towards Mr. Garcia. They were not biologically related. They were step. Mr. Holloway was Mr. Garcia's stepson. Potentially there was animosity towards Mark Castiglione, Brandon's father, or the church in general, that maybe was felt by Mr. Holloway, because I do think that is what the state believes is the motive for Mr. Holloway, but potentially the real target of Mr. Garcia's death was Mark Castiglione, was certainly in his house.
Prosecutors rejected those claims and say there's no exculpatory information. The judge is expected to rule at a later date.
We're back to her argument of relatedness. She doesn't see the harm in us providing it. There's still no reason for us to provide it because she hasn't identified any potentially exculpatory evidence that's contained within our file, other than the connection that I've already described. There's nothing in the file, and if she wants to present a more detailed account, then perhaps the issue should be reconsidered. But she specifically mentioned the Gagne standard, which is low, but it's a standard, and if we're going to use that one, defense hasn't come close to meeting it. I feel that we should not be compelled to provide this discovery.
Okay, a lot to get in here. Terri, let's discuss this theory by the defense that it was Holloway who killed Garcia. What do you think about that?
Look, whenever you can point the finger to another person, it creates reasonable doubt in the minds of the jurors. And supposedly the victim, Luis Garcia, and the defendant, Brandon Castiglione, they were friends, so the defense can say there's no motive here. So I think that's an argument to make. But when I think about Dale Holloway, he was the stepson, so what would his motive be? But supposedly, he was involved in this second shooting, and maybe he had something against his stepfather as a minister and the other minister who was involved in the second shooting. So I suppose it's an argument that the jury can make.
Brian, let's talk about the gun really quickly. The government is saying that Castiglione's fired the gun because his fingerprints were on there, but how do you argue that away?
All right, so the best way to tell if someone fired the gun, bar none, It's called GSR, gunshot residue. When you fire a gun, the ballistics cause some of that debris, some of that gunpowder to come back on your hands. Simply finding fingerprints on a gun just means at one point in time you touched it. And especially because there's no fingerprints on the shell casing, you can argue that he may have touched it at an earlier time but didn't fire it.
I'll tell you this much, juries love an alternative suspect. If the defense can show that, if they can present enough evidence, they might have something. It's a complicated case, but it'll be an interesting one to follow, to say the least. All right, everybody, thanks for joining us here on Law and Crime Daily. We'll see you next time as we discuss justice in America.